During the 18th century, Russia boasted a powerful navy of 60 ships of the line, roughly on par with the contemporary navies of France and Spain. And even though geographical constraints limited naval projection considerably, at times nothing stopped the Imperial Russian Navy from operating in remote theaters far from the heartland, like the Eastern Mediterranean. Exemplified in 1770, the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet bypassed both the Danish and Gibraltarian Straits to enter the Mediterranean for the first time. As Russia was in one of its several wars with the Turks, there were two main objectives for the expedition: clear Morea of Turkish occupation and provide assistance to Egypt's invasion of Ottoman Syria. Thereby, in summer the Russian fleet encountered the Turks at the Strait of Chios, then pursued them to Chesma Bay where the Turkish fleet was completely obliterated in just 2 days. Naval victory came too late to save Greek rebels in Morea, but in the aftermath several islands in the Aegean Sea fell to Russian occupation. The Near Eastern campaign also had mixed results. After a diplomatic breakdown, the Mamluks of Egypt declared their country free of Ottoman suzerainty, then formally allied Egypt with Russia. As anticipated, Russian Baltic Squadron arrived to help the Egyptians capture Beirut from the Turks, in modern Lebanon. The city changed hands between the Russians and Turks a few times in the early 1770s, but peace talks began in 1772. Russia's negotiating power was significantly strengthened by victories elsewhere in Crimea, the Balkans, and the Caucasus, allowing Russia to demand several favorable concessions from the Turks, one of which was the transfer of a single island in the Aegean to Russia. In response, Turkey stalled the truce long enough for Austrian and Prussian diplomatic pressure, in combination with the Pugachev rebellion, to seriously hamper Russia's position in the negotiations. Conflict resumed in 1773 once the Turks recaptured the Aegean Islands from Russians and forced their evacuation from the Near East. In the end, Russia made no gains in the Mediterranean from this war, and inexplicably enough, in the 1780s Russia also declined a British offer to cede Minorca if the Russians supported their position against France and the American colonist rebels. Spain occupied the island in 1782 anyways. Thus, Russia's dabbling with Mediterranean geopolitics between 1770 and 1782 was largely a failure. Hence why the Russian Navy decided to ignore the Mediterranean theater when Turkey went to war with Russia again between 1787 and 1792. Yet, Russia was coerced into entering the Mediterranean a second time during the late 1790s in order to check French influence over Turkey, which was always anti-Russian and considerably bolstered in 1797 following the French annexation of Ionian Islands near Turkey. Russia found a perfectly timed casus belli the next year when the French invaded Malta en route to Egypt, right after Emperor Paul I of Russia became the elected Grand Master of the island. Russian Black Sea Fleet under Admiral Ushakov swiftly entered the Mediterranean and evicted the French from the Ionian Islands once Corfu Fort was captured. These actions were conducted jointly with the Turks who granted Russia passage through their straits. Ionian Islands were then governed through the Sept-Insular Republic, a Russo-Turkish continuum. Another planned expedition to sweep the French from Malta did exist, but in 1799 Russia, feeling resentful against Austrian demands in North Italy, quit the coalition against France, leaving the Anglo-Portuguese to besiege Malta alone until the island was secured in 1800 to 1801. Soon it was apparent that Malta had not been immediately returned to the Russian emperor, and Anglo-Russian relations deteriorated to the point of war. Except the affair never amounted to anything because Paul I became assassinated in 1801. His successor, Alexander I, discontinued Paul's machinations over Malta and wisely chose not to inherit Paul's position as Grand Master of Malta. Instead, General Saltykov was appointed Grand Master to administer the island for both Russia and Britain until 1803. Russia lost another potentially strategic territory in the Mediterranean after defeats against Napoleon's France in Prussia bound Alexander to cede the Sept-Insular Republic to France as per the Treaty of Tilsit. Following Napoleon's defeat in 1814, Britain governed the Ionian Islands for 6 decades. As a result, Russia again detached itself from Mediterranean geopolitics for another 20 years. Nonetheless, the rebellion of Greeks in the 1820s flared up new Russian interest there. Russia, France, and Britain negotiated for Greek autonomy, yet the Turks refused, so in 1827 the three powers punished Turkey and its ally Egypt by opening conflict without even declaring war. Crucial Battle of Navarino saw the Allied squadron, dominated by the Russian fleet under Count Haydn, wipe out the Turkish and Egyptian fleets. The next year, French and Russian forces were deployed in the Balkans, and once Turkey capitulated, Greece became independent. However, within a decade the diplomatic arrangement of Europe drastically shifted, not for the first time. Now the Ottoman Empire was close to collapse and needed Russian help to repulse Egypt's invasion of Turkey. Russia may have decided it was strategically beneficial to prop up Turkey because Muhammad Ali, Egypt's ruler, was far more competent than the ailing Turkish government and would be a larger threat to Russia's interests in the Balkans. That probably explains why Emperor Nicholas I dispatched the Russian Black Sea Fleet and an expeditionary force to the eastern Mediterranean in 1833, with the consent of Turkey. But anticlimatically, no action was ever taken. Muhammad Ali immediately withdrew back to Syria, unwilling to pick a fight against Russia despite the fact that there was nothing stopping the Egyptians from marching on Constantinople after the Battle of Konya. For their support, Russia was rewarded exclusive passage through the Turkish Straits, a privilege closed to all other European countries. But it was not an uncontested privilege, for in 1839 Egypt threatened to overturn that agreement by going to war with Turkey again. The entire Turkish navy, carefully rebuilt after the disaster at Navarino, unceremoniously defected to the Egyptians. Russia was prepared for another confrontation against Egypt, but to the dismay of the emperor, so did every other European nation. Before Russia could react, Britain and Austria were already bombarding Egyptian forts in the Levant, while France, Egypt's ally, remained aloof. London Convention of 1840 resolved the so-called Oriental Crisis as Muhammad Ali agreed to withdraw from Crete and Syria, thus losing the ability to threaten Constantinople. In turn, Russia lost direct access to the Mediterranean because the involvement of other European powers resulted in international control of the straits. And it was agreed that Turkey maintained the right to close the straits in peacetime. Emperor Nicholas attempted to reverse that situation in 1844 by convincing the British into partitioning the Ottoman Empire, but to no avail, since Britain viewed Russia as its primary enemy on the global stage and saw Russian gains in the eastern Mediterranean as quite unacceptable. Only a decade later, Russia did indeed find itself at war with Britain along with Turkey and France. By that point, the Imperial Russian Navy had fallen prey to disrepair and was outdated, while Turkey's navy successfully reformed, surging ahead of Russia's to become the third most powerful fleet in the world. Therefore Russia could no longer afford to operate in the Mediterranean, and Russia barely sent ships there in both the Crimean War and the Russo-Turkish War of 1877 to 1878. During the late 19th century, Russia reclaimed its position as the third most powerful naval projector in the world, though most of the reconstruction placed emphasis on the Russian Pacific Fleet instead of the Mediterranean. By now it had become apparent that Britain and Austria were intent on propping up Ottoman control of the Straits, no matter how many times they lost against Russia. One of the last significant diplomatic actions Russia took regarding Mediterranean geopolitics occurred in 1887, when Russia and its new ally France blocked an Egyptian treaty with Britain that would have formalized the British occupation. During the Russo-Japanese War, Turkey closed the straits to the Russian Black Sea Fleet. And simultaneously Britain closed the Suez Canal to the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet, so the Russians chose not to enter the Mediterranean nor Egypt to reach the Far East. The next decade, Imperial Russian Navy was disbanded entirely, and until the 21st century Russian interest in the Mediterranean was henceforth limited. Today Russia has a significant military presence in Libya, Syria, and possesses military ties to Egypt. Perhaps it all indicates a hollow echo to Imperial Russia's old machinations towards the Mediterranean. Thanks for watching.